Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figure It Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is the NEC SuperGrafx, which, depending on your point of view, is either part of my Rare Variant series or kind of a retroactive addition to my 4th video game generation recap. Now, why is that? Let's talk all about it. But before we do that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, as well as my new travel channel called Flying and Eating, which is about adventures around the world. I think you guys will get a kick out of it. All that stuff is in the description. I really appreciate the support. Thank you very much. Now, yes, we are here to talk about the NEC PC Engine SuperGrafx, which is a system I would argue is not remembered by too many people, except for serious enthusiasts and YouTube nerds. Anyway, yeah, so what's the story? What's the deal? Before we talk about it, I think you need to know a little bit about where it came from, what its history is, and like why this even matters. So it's a bizarre looking machine, isn't it? Like, I don't know, it looks like something out of Star Trek. It's just like it's some sort of ship or collective, which is ironic because there is actually a version of the PC Engine called the Shuttle, which actually is supposed to look like a spacecraft. But regardless, it's a weird looking machine. But in order to really get it, like I said, you need to know it's the genesis of the system. So back in 1987, a lowly little computer company in Japan, called NEC, decided to enter the video game console market. They saw the success of the Nintendo Famicom, as well as the middling success of the Sega Mark III at the time, or what we would know to be eventually the Sega Master System, and they thought, hey, we can do that too. And along came the PC Engine, the little white dream machine that came out in 1987 in Japan and did extremely well. Now here's the thing that people don't tend to know about this machine. While it would ultimately lose to the Super Nintendo as far as sales, it actually crushed the Sega Mega Drive, or what we know to be the Sega Genesis, ultimately proving to be a very successful system. However, it's ironic that that was the competition, because that's not actually what it was set up to fight. This thing was actually built with the intention of going after the Nintendo Famicom, and again, to a lesser extent, the Sega Mark III. Now, you have to remember where NEC was at that point. When they released the machine, since that was their goal, they were kind of afraid of possible future hardware competition. Along comes 1988, and in that year, Sega comes out with the Sega Mega Drive, which was a far more capable machine than the PC Engine was capable of doing, and so they just kind of looked at it like, ooh, what if that destroys us? We gotta nip this in the bud, which is ironic, first of all, because it didn't happen. The Sega Mega Drive essentially flopped in Japan. But at the same time, that's a very Japanese thing to do, is just to kind of see some system, that's coming at yours and panic and just order new hardware. I mean, it's one of the reasons that Sega no longer does this, and probably one of the reasons that NEC doesn't do this as much, well, at all anymore, but there's multiple factors to that. Point is, they just decided, let's make an upgraded version of the system. And let's just get out in front of this problem, because while we can compete with Nintendo, Nintendo's still got all the market share. Their hardware is much worse than ours, but eventually Nintendo's going to make a better machine. Let's just do this now. Let's just make a more capable machine now. So along comes 1989, which is a very strange year, because in December of 1989, actually December 8th, 1989, which would be my birthday, not the same year, but the same day, NEC does it. They release the PC Engine SuperGrafx in Japan. And that's really cool. It's an upgraded version of the system. We'll talk a little bit more about the specifics soon, but to Japanese consumers, all right, we have a new version of the PC Engine and it does all this cool stuff. That's so awesome. I can't wait. But it's worth noting that only like 2-3 months earlier, NEC had released this, the TurboGrafx 16 in North America. These came out in the same year, only like 2 months apart. So you just sit there and you go, if you knew that you needed the extra hardware that you put in this, why didn't you just put that into the launch unit in North America? Maybe you would have been more successful. Now, I don't know this to be sure, but what I have to assume is clearly NEC eventually decided, hey, let's go with this whole CD-ROM thing. That's how we got the PC Engine CD and ultimately the TurboGrafx CD, which required these like ridiculous add-ons to get connected. I mean, in Japan, that was a little bit, more ridiculous, as ironic as that sounds, because you had to buy this like briefcase-looking thing called the interface unit, had to link it all together. In North America, you could technically buy them separate, but they launched together. It's like, they just decided this is what we're betting on, is that the PC Engine CD or TurboGrafx CD is the way to make our pre-existing system more capable. So what do you do with this thing? I feel like they were made by completely different teams and nobody knew what to bet on, but in true Japanese fashion, they just released them both anyway. So what exactly did they change? What is actually different about this machine? And why? I can't say why they didn't ultimately release this in North America or make this TurboGrafx 16 the same hardware under the hood. I don't know. I can only speculate that someone on the inside said, no, CD stuff is more capable. We'll just do this because we already did a bunch of the work and we should recoup some of the money. But that's pure speculation. What we do know is that it did come out and only sold 75,000 units. That's it. That was all that was ever made. 75,000 units. That is not a big number of consoles. And it was discontinued very quickly. In its entire lifespan, it only had five dedicated games. And I have 4 of them. I will try to go over very quickly here. I've got Aldines, the mission code for Rage Crisis. I've got Ghouls and Ghosts, also known as Dai Makamura, which is actually probably my favorite game on this system, as well as Battle Ace, and something that has an anime name that I don't remember the name of, but I'll put it there on the screen. But that's it. There was a 5th game, a version of 1941, which is actually a very good game, but I don't have that just because I couldn't find it. You know, in my case, I didn't have this since I was a kid, or there was no dream of mine to own this. I actually found this bundled together along with this controller, which looks not third party, but I don't think this is the controller that actually came with the system originally, but I'm not actually sure about that. But I found this whole bundle in Japan like a year ago at the time I record this. It was expensive, but then I thought it's only going to get worse. So I got a nice haircut on it because it had all the games with it. So yeah. And now we can make a video about it, right? So that's all good. But that's it. It only had those 5 dedicated games. But then there was actually another game called Darius Plus that had 2 different versions. Darius Plus was released at retail widely, and apparently, I don't have it, so I can't test this, but apparently it's the only PC Engine game that totally works on a PC Engine, but if you stick it into the SuperGrafx, it detects that you're in the SuperGrafx and then has additional code in there for additional benefits and perks. Then there's a second version of that was like a super limited release, only to 800 copies, and that one's like comically stupid, impossible to find. Obviously, I don't have that one either. But point is, that's kind of it as far as like the hardware legacy and everything that was existing in the PC Engine SuperGrafx. And so what actually was different about it? Like, what did they really change? The sad truth is, not a whole lot. So the PC Engine originally had a single video chip on it. They just put 2 of them in this thing. Now that sounds kind of dumb, but in reality they had made it smart enough that they could be, function independently of each other, thus allowing developers to take advantage of the additional hardware. So I'm again, no programmer, but you wouldn't be as limited to the kind of textures you could have, the kind of colors you could have, and the compatibility with each other. You could essentially have 2 different backgrounds at the same time, thus allowing more capabilities. It also had an extra RAM in it. That was more or less it. One other feature it had that doesn't really get talked about anymore, just because it's not important anymore, is that it had an AV jack on it, essentially allowing the system to have native composite output, which was actually a big upgrade over the PC Engine's original model, which only had RF out. Now, to be fair to NEC, they would make versions of the PC Engine that had composite output on them, as well as things like the interface unit that actually had it built in. But at the time, I could see where there would be some value to that. But it is funny, you look at it and you think NEC at the time probably approached this this is our next generation system. We're just going to move past the PC Engine original. It did its job. We're moving on to the SuperGrafx. That's the real one. We'll just keep the brand name on there because, to their credit, they made it backwards compatible with the original system. So all the original HuCard games totally work just fine on this. But they didn't support it. And so then they jumped ship from it, and then eventually they decided the successor of the system would be the PC Duo back here, which was really just the same thing here as the interface unit or the TurboGrafx 16, but all as one single system. So it has the cart slot, and it has the disk drive, all in a single system. But what's strange about it is the additional hardware that's in here does not exist on any other iteration of the system. The PC Duo doesn't have it, and I'm assuming the decision behind that was purely financial. It was Doubling the number of chips needed in there, not a great idea. Having to have the extra RAM for a bunch of games that don't exist, probably not a great idea. They probably just kind of came to the realization that the extra hardware and capabilities we wanted out of the system we get from the CD unit, so we don't really need that. Now that's where there is kind of a sticking point of, I don't know, amusement to me, is that I believe, and I don't know this, but I believe that the CD units and the SuperGrafx were two competing divisions at NEC, basically saying we need to solve the problem that management says, or corporate says, that the PC Engine needs something else. It needs a bigger thing. It needs to get bigger. What do? One team came up with this. One team came up with this. Again, I am speculating on this, but that just makes sense to me because they just seem like totally opposite concepts to each other. And the fact that the SuperGrafx was really not even considered when coming into things like the interface unit. And clearly the CD-ROM system won out because that's literally what they launched it with in North America only a couple months earlier. And then they made a ton of other iterations of the CD and eventually, put it right in there, but they didn't include any of the SuperGrafx hardware. But the other bit of evidence to that, and I give NEC some credit for this, you look at the SuperGrafx, and you have one of these interface units, right? I have a second one, yes. There is no way this will physically fit in here. It's not even close to design. Like, again, I think they were two totally different design teams that just said, no, we can't make that work, and we don't really care what the other team is doing. So to NEC's credit, I think what happened is someone at management told an engineer, you need to make this work. This thing has to go to that thing. And this guy came up with an idea. This is a thing called, I bought this a few years ago at a con because I was just stunned to see it. It's called the ROM2 adapter, RAU30. For the CD-ROM 2. This, to me, in every way screams some engineers like, I don't know, this is my Band-Aid solution. This is a thing, this little box here. And the goal with it is you would take this white little adapter and you stick it into the interface unit, and then you take the other side and you connect it to the back of the SuperGrafx. And as ridiculous as this looks, as insane as this looks, this works. You can then use the CD system on the SuperGrafx, which is just... It's bonkers, but it totally works. And the box specifically mentions it. Like, that's the whole point of this thing, is it's a SuperGrafx adapter specifically for the interface unit. And I bought that before I had a SuperGrafx. Now, to be fair, NEC would eventually release versions of the PC Engine that did work on this. But why I'm bringing all that up, who cares what the CD system has anything to do with it? What I think is really funny is that the original motive behind this whole thing clearly was, we need to have the most capable system in this generation. And that's what did it, and this was the two of them trying to duke it out to see like which version of that would be. The irony is, if they work together, you actually have that, at least for a minute in time. The extra capabilities of the SuperGrafx mixed with the extra capabilities of the CD unit actually was vastly more capable than anything that was on the Genesis or Mega Drive, including when they had the Sega CD. And eventually the Super Nintendo would, of course, defeat that, but for at least for like a year or two, they would have had it. Where it's ironic is that combination, there was no game made for that. So there are obviously CD games, and they work on the SuperGrafx, as I just said. But there wasn't a single CD game produced that used the extra capabilities of this system. Think of it kind of like when Sega had the Sega CD and the 32X. There are like 5 or 6 games, I think it's technically 6, that actually work with all 3 of those units combined, even though they didn't do a very good job with those 6. They technically exist. Somebody could have done that, but no one ever did. And that's unfortunate, because it would have been very curious to see what those capabilities were. Maybe someone in the independent scene can address that at some point. That would be very cool, but... yeah, I mean, that's, honestly, in the end, that's kind of its story. It didn't last very long, it was more or less forgotten to the ash heap of history, and now NEC, at least retroactively, it's pretty clear to look at it more like the PS4 Pro if the PS4 Pro had failed, as opposed to saying, this is the PS5, never mind, the PS5 didn't work out, we're going back to the PS4. That's more or less what they did. So, where do you sit? You know, I put it in both playlists because I genuinely don't know. I mean, if you ask somebody at NEC as if they're an authority on the subject, I suppose, they would probably tell you, no, we made like a whole bunch of different versions of the PC Engine. That was just like the weird, like, you know, Rolls-Royce one. That was the luxury one. And if you wanted, you could have had a couple of fancy extra games, and that's it. And we moved on. Kind of like, again, if the Game Boy Color had failed. You know what I mean? And they just went back to the original Game Boy if Nintendo had done that. But the alternative way of looking at it is, no, this was actually its own separate system that just kind of existed in the middle of a different system cycle that failed, and they just kind of ignore it entirely. Because, to be fair, it has 5 games that are wholly unique to it that only work on it. They cannot work on a stock model. So does that define it as its own separate system? Maybe. Yes. Kind of like the Pioneer Laser Active. You know, it requires either the PC Engine adapter or a TurboGrafx adapter or the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive adapter. If you guys saw my video on the Pioneer Laser Active, without those adapters, that system is nothing. But with it, it has its own exclusive library of games that were built on Laserdiscs. Is that its own system? I said yes, but I can see why someone would say no. So in this one, I'm really truly on the fence. Like, I kind of see it like, yeah, it's totally its own separate thing. Hence, it's on the 4th gen playlist now. But I also kind of see it as just like this mutant thing that probably really shouldn't have existed. Hence, rare variants. Where do you stand? You tell me. What do you think? Where would you put it? Or would you put it in either? Would you put it in handhelds? If you did, if you said you would have put it in handhelds, I genuinely think you need to see a doctor for a recent unrelated head injury or possibly more related. But regardless, yes, SuperGrafx. If you want to get one these days, they're not, even though they weren't produced in mass numbers, they're not actually that hard to get as far as finding them. They are expensive. That's the key. I saw them in Japan a couple of times. Obviously, I pulled the trigger on this one because it came with all these games. But while you can find it, just be prepared to pay a lot for it. It is purely a novelty unless you're just really into these 5 games. But to be fair, if you do get it and then you have something like the Turbo EverDrive Pro or whatever, that device will actually allow you to play the SuperGrafx games on this. But it's also worth noting that if you have something like the Terra Onion device that connects onto the back of the original PC Engine, that one has an FPGA in it, thus replicating the capabilities of the SuperGrafx, so you can actually play all 5 of the games on a stock unit. But to be fair, that's because that has extra hardware in it. Anyway, my point is, this is really a collector's piece and a novelty item. It's, unless you're just really a hardware enthusiast who really likes those 5 games, it is probably not worth getting the system for just its library. You get it because it's just a piece of video game history and you like to collect stuff, like this guy. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this and the little history lesson there. Again, tell me what you guys think about where it belongs. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please, as always, check out the description and you know, social media stuff: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. New travel channel, Spreadshirt, all of that, as well as, of course, like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.